November 13th, 2007. Speak, Liverpool. Colin Smith finishes training like he always does. Sweat, towel, routine. A text flashes up from a familiar name. Come outside, quick word, business. He doesn't hesitate. Why would he? He's handled business his whole life. But the message is fake. The number is masked. And in the car park, two men have been waiting, for weeks, studying him, timing him. Tonight isn't a meeting, it's a settlement. To understand why Colin Smith dies here, we have to go back 6 years, to the one decision that turned him into a marked man. Liverpool, in the 1980s. Formerly the grand portal to the British realm, the metropolis that constructed vessels and transported freight for half the globe, currently confronting joblessness rates nearing 40% in certain districts. The wharves shut down. Whole neighborhoods founded on seafaring labor are suddenly stripped of meaning, stripped of wages, stripped of optimism. Into this financial ruin pours heroin initially, granting Liverpool the bleak moniker Smack City by the middle of the decade. Then the white powder shows up. Less expensive to manufacture, highly lucrative to peddle, simpler to traffic, through the exact maritime facilities that lawful commerce had forsaken. The layout of Liverpool rendered it flawless for Latin American syndicates, hunting for European supply chains, direct naval pathways from Colombia, deeply rooted Spanish expat neighborhoods offering social and verbal links, and a destitute demographic eager to embrace hazards that wealthier towns would likely shun. For adolescent males maturing in Liverpool's impoverished housing blocks, the option becomes ruthlessly clear-cut. Register for state benefits at 70 quid a week, or step into the narcotics arena, where a solitary triumphant deal can pull in more than 12 months of honest labor. A few elect destitution, others elect peril, and a select handful, the cunning ones, the cautious ones, those who study the blunders of their peers, opt for the narcotics game, and genuinely endure. Curtis Warren serves as the blueprint, the UK's premier narco boss to hit the Sunday Times rich list, boasting an approximated net worth of 185 million sterling. He funnels blow from South America via the Netherlands into the UK, constructing a syndicate that renders him concurrently renowned and invincible until 1996, when Dutch authorities ultimately dismantle his operation. Warren is nabbed, locked up, his domain ruined. All at once, a void emerges at the apex of Liverpool's underworld ladder. The issue isn't whether anybody will occupy Curtis Warren's throne. It is a matter of who possesses the intellect to glean lessons from his missteps. The solution is a guy nobody suspects. Recall, Colin Smith marched into a snare just outside his fitness center in 2007. Yet the snare was laid down years prior in a metropolis where lawful prospects had evaporated and illicit ventures presented the sole avenue to riches. Colin Smigger Smith represents the exact opposite of Curtis Warren. Warren steered Ferraris, sported tailored suits, flaunted his affluence, and fostered a public persona as the UK's most triumphant crook. He desired the entire world to recognize his face. Smith resides in an unassuming semi-detached property in Speke, operates a basic vehicle, dons standard attire, and manages a network of lawful auto wash enterprises throughout Merseyside. His local peers view a dedicated dad to 4 kids. His spouse recognizes a diligent partner who departs for his shifts early and comes back in time for supper. His offspring have a father who shows up to academic gatherings, mentors soccer, and enjoys family getaways to the Spanish coast. But investigative dossiers narrate an alternate saga. Concealed behind those auto wash shops, truly lucrative endeavors that offer flawless camouflage, Colin Smith commands one of Europe's most advanced cocaine smuggling webs, direct conduits to Colombian syndicates, solidified pathways via Spanish expat webs in Marbella and the Costa del Sol, cargo concealed inside altered transports, shipping receptacles, and lawful commercial freight. From 1995 to 2001, intelligence informants project Smith imported powder valued at hundreds of millions of sterling, potentially surpassing Curtis Warren's maximum capacity. His supreme advantage wasn't his trafficking prowess, even though he was mechanically adept. It wasn't his contacts either, despite his syndicate stretching from Merseyside to Marbella to Medellin. His ultimate weapon was his prestige. Two rules governed every single deal: prudence and dependability. Prudence signified zero boasting, zero ostentatious shopping, zero outward flaunting of riches that might draw the gaze of law enforcement or envious rivals. His illicit partners recognized him strictly by his street alias, Smigger. Several remained ignorant of his actual identity. The majority had never laid eyes on his residence. Dependability meant every single cargo showed up promptly, every single settlement was issued swiftly, every single obligation was respected without hesitation. In an underworld where faith is rare and backstabbing is routine, Smith's promise transformed into a currency vastly more precious than illicit powder. Latin American providers, inherently distrustful of overseas counterparts, having been scorched countless times by pushers who vanish with the merchandise or snitch to the authorities, learned to rely on Colin Smith absolutely. He never skipped a settlement, never skimped on a load, never dragged them into bloodshed or theatrical conflicts. For more than 10 years, this dual existence operated flawlessly. Smith became incredibly affluent while remaining utterly unseen, assembling a syndicate so discreetly that not even fellow crooks grasped his magnitude, until he encountered the solitary figure who possessed the power to shatter it all. Colin Smith had absorbed the lessons of Curtis Warren's collapse. Keep your mouth shut, remain trustworthy, and the cash continues to pour in. Any illicit domain requires muscle, an individual to gather dues, terrify competitors, and manage scenarios demanding far more than simple mediation. Colin Smith located his muscle in Stephen Lawler, an ex-night spot bouncer, physically intimidating, deeply accustomed to brutality and manners. Smith fundamentally was not. Whereas Smith dodged clashes, Lawler flourished in them. Whereas Smith conversed gently, Lawler issued ultimatums that individuals took seriously. The alliance functioned brilliantly because their talents balanced each other out rather than clashing. Smith oversaw the logistics, the delivery lines, the fiscal structuring, and the diplomatic ties with the Colombian suppliers. Lawler oversaw the muscle work, the debt recovery, and progressively, the direct bargaining with the drug lords themselves. Lawler's hostile demeanor genuinely awed the suppliers, who prized sheer dominance. Colombian cartel envoys, normalized to utilizing brutality as a standard corporate tactic, perceived Lawler's methodology as significantly more logical than Smith's subdued diplomacy. By the year 2001, Lawler had evolved into Smith's principal conduit to the Colombian syndicates. He journeyed to Spain frequently, conferring with cartel liaisons, haggling over rates, mapping out transit specifics. The South Americans placed their faith in him. Even more crucially, they viewed him as the leading associate in the Merseyside enterprise. This illusion that Lawler, rather than Smith, commanded the web was concurrently beneficial cover for Smith, and a perilous weak spot he failed to completely recognize. Then arrived the chance of a lifetime. 500 kilos of unadulterated Colombian blow, a street worth of roughly 72 million. One of the most massive solitary loads ever coordinated for the UK demographic. The maneuvers were intricate, yet achievable, utilizing their established avenues. Shipment divided into smaller loads, transported through Spain, hidden in modified vehicles brought into Britain, through multiple entry points to minimize risk. The profit potential is staggering, even accounting for distribution costs, security expenses, payments to local dealers. Smith and Lawler stand to make approximately 20 million each. Everything should go smoothly. Both men have executed dozens of similar operations. The Colombian suppliers trust them. The distribution network in Britain is established and reliable. But in May 2001, just as the shipment is being finalized, Stephen Lawler is murdered. Remember, Smith built his success on trust and reliability. That reputation was about to be tested in the worst possible way. Liverpool's door wars, savage conflicts surrounding late-night venue protection deals that spawn millions in extortion funds and furnish flawless camouflage for narcotics vending. Stephen Lawler, utilizing his dormant history and increasingly blatant affluence, morphs into a mark. Competitions that could have stayed merely vocal escalate into the physical realm. Warnings shift into physical deeds. May of 2001. Lawler is blasted to death in clear daylight on a Merseyside avenue. A highly skilled execution, several gunmen, zero bystanders prepared to speak up. The homicide officially stays an unsolved mystery. For Colin Smith, the demise of Lawler initiates an urgent emergency, stretching leagues beyond sorrow for a deceased companion and commercial ally. Stephen Lawler functioned as Smith's core liaison to the Colombian drug lords. He possessed specifics regarding the £72 million cargo that Smith lacked. He maintained bonds with cartel middlemen that Smith had never independently fostered. He remained, in the perspective of the South Americans, the dominant associate, the figure they relied upon to manage their goods. And suddenly, he is deceased. The cargo, 500 kilos of uncut powder, rests in a fortified spot somewhere within Europe, anticipating ultimate transit plans that only Lawler entirely comprehended. Smith confronts a dilemma: the righteous route. Reach out to the South American providers right away. Clarify Lawler's demise. Hash out fresh logistics. Prove that the Merseyside web stays dependable, regardless of this devastating interruption. Take a lesser payout while the South Americans secure novel middlemen, preserving the faith. Or Colin Smith, the individual whose prestige was founded on trustworthiness, opts for the path that will eventually end his life. He resolves to retain the narcotics, every last ounce of it, peddle it independently utilizing entrenched supply webs, and stash the full margin. Not a mere 20 million, but nearer to 40 million, once he carves out Lawler's portion and the South Americans' percentage. But he cannot merely vanish with 500 kilos of cartel product. The drug lords would instantaneously recognize what occurred. They would track him down in a matter of weeks. Thus, Smith fabricates a falsehood. He informs the Colombian providers that the load was confiscated by Netherlands border control. Disastrous timing, horrendous misfortune. Yet such events transpire in the narcotics sector. Police confiscations represent persistent hazards that everybody embraces. He supplies specifics, timeframes, coordinates, and credible justifications. He voices suitable sorrow and frustration. The suppliers, who lean on Colin Smith's web purely because it has perpetually proven trustworthy, swallow his story. They brush off the £72 million cargo as a corporate casualty and pivot away. In the interim, Smith covertly vends the powder via his firmly planted UK network throughout the subsequent months. He pulls in roughly 20 million, vastly more than he has ever scored from a solitary job. Ample funds to secure his lineage for eras to come. Ample capital to shift completely into lawful commerce should he desire. For multiple months, the fabrication holds up. Smith assumes he has pulled off the flawless heist. However, within the illicit subculture, confidential matters rarely remain confidential indefinitely. And the moment the reality surfaced, it originated from the absolute last individual Smith anticipated. The product that was intended to render Smith and Lawler wealthy was currently Smith's exclusive property. But that was only true if the South Americans never uncovered the reality. The precise chronology stays ambiguous. Espionage briefings indicate the facts surfaced sometime in the latter half of 2001 or the dawn of 2002, roughly 6 to 9 months subsequent to Smith snatching the cargo. The informant was an entity that police dossiers label as the Cocaine King, an illicit peer whose exact identity fluctuates across various surveillance briefings, yet whose function remains uniform. A figure boasting ties to both Smith's Merseyside network and the Latin American cartel liaisons. Whether born of recklessness, retaliation for a separate grievance, or merely the sheer impossibility of harboring such a colossal secret in a realm where intel equates to wealth, somebody tipped off the South Americans about the true events. There was zero Netherlands border confiscation. Stephen Lawler's demise was not the disaster that derailed the transaction. Colin Smith, the subdued, trustworthy UK ally they had leaned on for years, hijacked 500 kilos of their product and fabricated a story right to their faces. The cartel's retaliation was immediate and unequivocal. A bounty valued at £1 million was slapped onto Colin Smith's skull. The decree echoed throughout illicit syndicates across the continent. Track him down, execute him, and claim the reward. £1 million, a sum surpassing what the majority of career crooks accumulate in their entire span. Vastly sufficient to entice scores of prospective hitmen. Yet this was not principally about reclaiming the funds. The South Americans had already designated the cargo's worth as a corporate casualty. The £1 million dropped on Smith's murder represented a distinct breed of investment, an investment in prestige. Colombian syndicates forged their global enterprises upon a pair of core tenets: steadfastness and rapid vengeance. They dispatched merchandise punctually, and they penalized treachery without a second thought. Should Smith's thievery remain unpenalized, it would embolden other illicit allies throughout Europe to contemplate identical betrayals. The broadcast needed absolute clarity. Pilfer from the South Americans, and your life is forfeit. Not rapidly, not comfortably, but absolutely, inevitably. Colin Smith, the bloke who had constructed his entire underworld legacy on grasping faith and prestige, had breached both. And presently, he confronted repercussions that zero sum of cash could avert. He had transformed into the most severely hunted figure in the UK's illicit underground. The timer ticking down to his demise had commenced. However, it would not conclude rapidly. Recall that SMS message right outside the fitness centre back in 2007. It represented the concluding manoeuvre in a match that kicked off here, the moment the syndicates realised they had been crossed. 2001 to 2007. 6 complete years spanning between the bounty and the murder. 6 cycles of existing with the certainty that a faction of the globe's most lethal individuals desired his death and were willing to compensate lavishly to see it finalized. Colin Smith was aware the South Americans hadn't let it go. Illicit peers murmured cautions. Surveillance dossiers later unsealed in legal transcripts from separate trials detailed shady figures conducting probes regarding Smith's routines, setting up observations, and harvesting intel concerning his daily patterns. The £1 million reward dictated that any unknown face could serve as a prospective killer. Any unforeseen tap on the door, any strange automobile idling adjacent to his residence, any fresh face turning up at his health club. But Smith could not simply flee. Vanishing would validate his culpability and render him simpler to track. A fugitive naturally draws focus, creates footprints, and commits blunders. More crucially, absconding would mean forsaking everything he had labored to construct. His enterprises, real estate, domestic ties, the complete lawful existence he had fabricated as a disguise. Instead of running, Smith adopted an alternative tactic: camouflage himself in broad daylight, while deliberately pivoting towards authentic legal enterprise. From 2003 through 2007, he progressively concentrated on legitimate operations. The auto wash shops morphed into authentic revenue streams, as opposed to mere facades. He funneled cash into Spanish real estate via lawful avenues. He declined underworld prospects valued in the millions, covertly untangling himself from dynamic narcotics peddling. To casual onlookers, Colin Smith seemed to be walking the straight and narrow, devoting greater hours to his household, nurturing lawful corporate pursuits, and isolating himself from criminal associates. But the transition wasn't complete, and it wasn't happening fast enough. Intelligence assets disclosed a decade later, via Freedom of Information inquiries, documents confirming at least a pair of verified murder attempts throughout this era. Both flopped owing to 11th-hour itinerary shifts. Smith scrubbing meetings, tweaking his routes, the exact breed of volatility that preserves a target's life. But each close call was luck, not skill. Eventually, luck runs out. The psychological pressure must have been enormous. Imagine living 4, 5, or 6 years knowing that professional killers are actively hunting you, that every public appearance is a calculated risk, that the text message you just received, the person waiting in your car park, the stranger asking directions, any of them might be the one. Did Smith believe time would solve his problem? Perhaps. Criminal memories are notoriously short. Agendas alter. Fresh adversaries surface. Perhaps he presumed the South Americans would ultimately pivot to more urgent matters. If that was the case, he was mortally incorrect, because on November 13, 2007, his history ultimately seized him. 6 years. That is the duration Smith succeeded in remaining one bound ahead. Half a decade of glancing behind his back, tweaking his habits, praying the drug lords would simply let it go. November 13, 2007. We cycle back to where this narrative commenced, yet presently armed with the total perspective of what guided Colin Smith toward this exact juncture. His final 24 hours initiate normally. He embraces his spouse upon departure, tackles some admin at the auto wash, executes phone calls, audits financial ledgers, the tedious specifics of a legal entrepreneur's standard Tuesday. As the afternoon wanes, he motors to his usual health club in Speak. He has frequented this spot for years. The personnel recognize his face. Fellow attendees acknowledge him. Absolutely nothing bizarre, nothing menacing. He finalizes his physical training, a bit of cardio, some lifting, preserving the wellness regimen he has adhered to for over a decade. Vigorous habits, prioritizing his physical state, preparing for a destiny he trusts he will endure to witness. His cellular device vibrates, an SMS from a contact he knows. Somebody requires a prompt outdoor rendezvous, a commercial topic. It will barely take a minute. The text appears completely authentic. Standard corporate correspondence, the exact sort he pulls in consistently. Smith tucks his device away, collects his gear, and strides toward the departure doors. What he remains blind to, what he cannot fathom, is that the text is a forgery. The caller ID is masked utilizing software readily accessible to any individual prepared to shell out the cash. The alleged pressing corporate issue is a lure. An entity has been monitoring his trajectories for weeks, absorbing his routines, charting his rhythms, recognizing that Smith hits this fitness center roughly thrice a week, generally pulling up around a consistent hour, typically lingering for about 90 minutes, and normally departing solo. Smith forces open the facility doors and exits into the chilly autumn dusk. The asphalt lot is reasonably populated. Several vehicles resting alongside the curb, standard foot traffic, absolutely nothing appearing strange. The urban illumination is decent, though hardly blinding. The climate is completely ordinary. He sweeps his gaze across the zone, searching for whoever transmitted the text. Then he spots the silhouette closing in. Somber apparel, features hidden, advancing with absolute intent straight towards him. By the second Colin Smith processes that a disaster is unfolding, it is vastly too late to sprint, vastly too late to respond, vastly too late for anything save the grim comprehension that this is exactly how his run concludes. The hitman wields a shortened shotgun, a firearm selected for its catastrophic impact at point-blank proximity, for the absolute guarantee of the outcome, for delivering an unmistakable statement. This is no mere caution. This is not a bargaining session. A pair of rounds are discharged. Both find their mark. Colin Smith perishes on a Merseyside pavement, mere yards from the fitness centre where he merely wrapped up his training. The hit is savage, streamlined, and definitively expert. The executioner melts into the autumnal shadows, leaving behind a corpse and a statement comprehended by every crook operating in the UK. The South American syndicates invariably extract their dues. In a matter of minutes, the zone is crawling with law enforcement, yet nabbing Smith's assassins would turn out to be virtually unachievable for causes that highlight the boundaries of UK police power against global illicit webs. The SMS was a forgery, the rendezvous was a trap, and the 6-year timer that kicked off with a £20 million deception had eventually hit absolute zero. Merseyside Constabulary deploys Operation Nike instantly. Scores of investigators are drafted. Crime scene units evaluate the location. Bystanders are interrogated. Security footage is analyzed. Intelligence informants are queried. The probe holds notable perks. The homicide transpired in a relatively open setting, with prospective onlookers. Smith's profound illicit history furnishes glaring rationales. The clinical execution style points to orchestrated crime rings that authorities had been tracking for decades. However, perks do not automatically convert into guilty verdicts. The South American link is glaringly apparent from the jump. Espionage dossiers detail the million-pound bounty. Snitches verify that syndicate-linked figures had been digging into Smith's locations in the seasons prior to his execution. The incentive is transparent. The tactic is transparent. Even the broad origin is transparent. But proving it within a UK tribunal is practically unachievable. The entities who mandated Colin Smith's murder manage affairs from Latin America, shielded by vast distances, geopolitical hurdles, and the functional unlikelihood of dragging cartel bosses over to answer to British tribunals. The individuals who executed the hit are experts who abandoned zero biological traces at the location. No smudged prints, no genetic material. Zero bystanders who caught a glimpse of their features sharply enough to offer beneficial composites. They presumably vacated the UK within hours of the gunfire, disappearing into criminal networks across Europe before police even knew their nationalities. The regional crooks who might possess intel are either excessively terrified to speak or too deeply intertwined to act as reliable testifiers. The strict code of silence sheltering underworld syndicates similarly shields them from detectives, even when certain affiliates might secretly endorse the lethal payback. Operation Nike executes sweeps. Multiple figures are grilled, a few detained on unconnected infractions. Squeeze tactics are utilized via the standard avenues. Intel harvesting persists for several years. Yet regardless of the exhaustive probe, regardless of numerous detentions, regardless of cross-border alliances with Spanish and Dutch constabularies, Operation Nike never yields a solitary conviction regarding Colin Smith's homicide. The dossier remains technically open and unresolved. This lack of closure is hardly abnormal. Liverpool was enduring a surge of narcotics-linked homicides throughout this era. Upwards of a century of parallel incidents between 2004 and 2010, the overwhelming bulk resting in the cold case files. Expert hits are notoriously tricky to crack when bystanders refuse to vocalize. Tangible clues are sparse, and the genuine shot callers dictate from outside the legal perimeter. Senior Detective Dave Brunskill, who spearheaded Operation Nike, informed the press in 2008, "We grasp exactly why Colin Smith was terminated. We grasp exactly who ordered his demise. What we simply cannot accomplish is proving it to the rigid threshold demanded for a legal conviction." It is a candid concession of policing boundaries when confronting global coordinated crime. Yet the authentic casualties were not the detectives unable to close the file or the crooks who absorbed the grim broadcast. The authentic casualties were left to mourn a figure they assumed they deeply knew. Remember, this hit was a corporate resolution, performed with the identical clinical exactness the syndicates applied to their powder enterprises. Colin Smith's spouse and 4 offspring were stripped of a partner and dad in a flash of savage brutality just outside a health club. Then they absorbed the reality. The subdued domestic guy who showed up to academic functions and mentored youth soccer had been maintaining a fractured existence. The auto wash shops that appeared to fund their cozy livelihood were merely facades for one of the UK's most colossal cocaine trafficking webs. The figure they relied upon, cherished, and anchored their existence to, had snatched 20 million in illicit goods from Latin American syndicates and compensated for it with his own breath. They mourned not merely his passing, but the stark unveiling of his true nature. The dad they recognized had never genuinely existed. He was a meticulously woven facade, a character enacted persuasively for over a decade. While the genuine Colin Smith maneuvered within a darkness they never once guessed, the wider populace absorbed severe tolls as well. Smith's execution was a component of a surge in narcotics-fueled bloodshed that extinguished over 100 souls across Liverpool across this timeline. Every single hit bolstered loops of vengeance and payback that rendered whole districts hazardous for average citizens, possessing zero ties to the illicit drug sphere. Law enforcement absorbed agonizing truths regarding the constraints of standard patrolling against global coordinated syndicates. The genuine bosses remained shielded by national lines and diplomatic buffers, expert hitmen vanishing entirely without a trace, regional detectives fully capable of investigating deeply, yet utterly impotent to apprehend the genuinely culpable parties. For the underworld populace, the broadcast was crystal clear. Cross the South Americans strictly at your own peril. The £1,000,000 dropped on Smith's hit represented an investment in syndicate prestige, funds excellently allocated to secure impending obedience from alternate illicit allies stretching across Europe. A multitude of Merseyside crooks allegedly shifted their habits following Smith's demise. Outstanding balances settled far more swiftly, freight managed with vastly more caution. A silent realization that South American tolerance possesses boundaries, and South American vengeance is absolute. Yet stretching past the bloodshed and the unclosed police binders, Smith's narrative poses unsettling queries regarding paths taken, the fallout, and whether true retribution was ever genuinely feasible in this scenario. Colin Smith perished just outside a health club in Speke, but the authentic disaster was unfolding within a domestic residence where a quartet of kids were discovering their dad had never actually been the man they envisioned. Colin Smith's saga kicked off with fiscal agony and choked-off prospects. Similar to countless adolescent men in 1980s Liverpool, he confronted a crossroads pitting legal destitution, state handouts, base-wage labor, and eras of monetary hardship against illicit affluence via the exclusive booming sector in his district, narcotics smuggling. For 15 long years, the illicit trade supplied absolutely everything it vowed. Millions in margins, prestige within underworld rings, the capacity to grant his household a standard of living that lawful employment could never rival. For an extended stretch, it appeared as though Smith had conquered the statistics. Yet his narrative simultaneously proves that underworld triumph is perpetually fleeting and predominantly lethal. Smith's terminal error was assuming he could dictate results within a fundamentally chaotic ecosystem. Illicit operations hinge on mutual faith between individuals lacking any legal safety net the moment that faith shatters. They entail associations with figures who remedy disputes via sheer brutality. They mandate upholding fragile equilibriums that can fracture without a whisper of warning. The moment Smith snatched the £72 million powder cargo, he shattered the primary commandment that had preserved his heartbeat. Always settle your obligations. Within legitimate commerce, robbery might spawn litigation, monetary fines, or perhaps jail time. Within the underworld sphere, robbery spawns the grave. The solitary unknown is the timing. The 6-year lag bridging the bounty and the murder showcases an alternate facet of syndicate retribution: endurance. They did not respond recklessly. They strategized meticulously, harvested surveillance, and bided their time for the absolute flawless window. Their payback was a corporate resolution, performed with the identical clinical rigor they utilized for powder supply routes. Open questions remain. Could Smith have endured by admitting his theft instantly and reimbursing the drug lords? Highly doubtful. The fabrication was arguably the more severe offense, the disrespect sharper than the robbery. The South Americans might have swallowed the monetary repayment, yet Smith's treachery scarred their prestige in a manner that cash simply could not mend. Did he realize in his concluding seconds precisely who transmitted the fabricated text? We will eternally remain ignorant. The hit unfolded vastly too swiftly for parting sentiments or ultimate epiphanies. What became of the 20 million he secured? Most likely, a portion was confiscated by law enforcement during ensuing sweeps. A fraction presumably rests concealed, either poured into legitimate ventures or buried in ledgers his loved ones are unable to breach. The South Americans absolutely never retrieved it. Was there ever a genuine prospect for justice via lawful avenues? Not in reality. The figures accountable for sanctioning Smith's murder dictate from territories where UK policing possesses zero practical authority. Even supposing South American officials collaborated utterly, which they wouldn't, demonstrating a plot spanning global borders demands proof that plainly fails to materialize. Ultimately, Smith's fortune proved utterly hollow because corpses cannot utilize currency, and specific debts can only be settled via one particular method. Recall that crossroad in 2001, opting to hoard the powder and fabricate a narrative about a border bust. That singular pivot robbed Smith of his heartbeat, but it likewise robbed his loved ones of their dad and their entire concept of his identity. Colin Smith's aftermath stands as an alarm regarding the genuine price tag of effortless wealth, and a prompt that specific routes, the moment they are tread, can never be reversed. He survived lengthier than the vast majority in a sphere where the standard pusher's trajectory concludes behind bars or in the grave inside half a decade. He accumulated deeper pockets than Curtis Warren, maintained a lower profile than any cartel boss prior, and very nearly succeeded in pivoting into a lawful existence. Very nearly. But the calculus of underworld bloodshed is ruthlessly unyielding. Every single pusher, every single trafficker, every single illicit pioneer trusts they will prove to be the outlier, the solitary figure who gathers riches while dodging the bullet. The data plainly rejects that conviction. When Smith stepped into the narcotics arena, he embraced the prospect of a brutal demise as a theoretical hazard, a fate reserved for reckless folks, careless folks, folks entirely distinct from himself. The moment he robbed the South Americans, he rendered that prospect an absolute certainty. The inquiry his saga presents isn't whether he warranted his ultimate fate. That is a philosophical knot devoid of simple solutions, a dilemma encompassing sheer necessity, distinct paths, severe fallout, and the chasm separating lawful retribution and raw consequences. The true inquiry is whether we fully grasp the authentic tolls. It was not merely Smith's heartbeat abruptly halted outside a Merseyside fitness centre. It was not merely the unclosed homicide file resting in detective archives, but rather his kids' psychological scarring upon uncovering their dad was a total stranger. It was his neighborhood's terror, enduring eras of narcotics-driven bloodshed, and the grim broadcast delivered to the subsequent youth observing from Liverpool's impoverished blocks. The underworld compensates handsomely, right up until, abruptly and disastrously, it completely stops. If meticulous, UK-centric coverage of narratives resembling this holds value for you, ponder hitting that subscribe button. We document authentic crime sagas with the precision and dignity they warrant, and we would prize your feedback on which files to crack open next. Colin Smith's chapter has concluded, yet the dilemmas it provokes concerning specific paths, severe fallout, and ultimate justice persistently linger.